Next up is our last of our 4 preview season episodes. In these shows, our expert guests tell you who to watch out for each team and what we predict will be the outcome for each of them. Next up, the Scotia NHL North Division. Hit the music. Welcome to Jablam Sports Hockey, folks. I'm your host, Peter Bonjaranov, and the mic is always on. You can find me on Twitter at Russia98. You can find the full show at Jablam Sports. If you have any questions or comments, please tweet us. Use the hashtag Jablam Sports. That's JABLAM Sports. Please subscribe to us if you haven't done so yet, and click on the 3 dots in your podcasting app. Share our show with 3 hockey fans you know. Thank you, everyone. Remember, check out our website, go to jablamsports.com, see all our podcasts, and even game notes for each episode. You'll get links to all the things we mentioned on this show, including guests. For our podcasts, click on podcasts, and then hockey on this show specifically right on our website. We head to Stampede City and talk Flames. Now with us is Brenden Parker. He's the Flames TV host. You can find him on Twitter at BParkerTV. Welcome to the Jablam Sports Hockey Podcast, Brenden.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, appreciate it. It's great. We're in the rink right now. I know we were just doing a little tour here, a very virtual tour. It's good to be back.
I saw you taking off your mask. So what are the protocols right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's, pretty standard stuff as far as kind of what everybody's dealing with, but, socially distanced in terms of the rest of the media, and everybody can kind of come in. You go through some testing, temperature testing, and wear a mask at all times. And then, obviously we take it off. We have a little studio set up on the concourse level, so we're not down at event level. That's kind of reserved for the players and coaching staff and everybody that's in the sort of traveling bubble. And then up top, we get an opportunity to watch practice, but a little higher than normal and kind of socially distanced among everybody else. And then when we do our television work, we'll take our masks off, and then otherwise it stays on. So it's pretty well run, and obviously it's important, and everybody follows the protocol, and that's kind of how it's going.
I'm not too sure if all our followers and listeners can hear that, but who's behind you giving her in the background right now, slapping her pretty bad in practice?
Yeah, you're going to hear a few different banging and crashing. So the Flames just finished up their practice. Canucks, I believe this is their taxi squad that's on the ice right now. So they're just going through the paces after they played back-to-back games in Edmonton. So taxi squad's on the ice. So there's about, I think there's 2 goalies and 6 guys out there right now. So, yeah.
So let's get to some Flames talk specifically. In my opinion, the Flames are pretty good in the bubble. They lost to the Stars in that official first round, but it was tight. It was a very close series. Then in the offseason, they lost TJ Brody, Michael Smith, Travis Hamonic, and Cam Talbot. And then they went and made big splashes with signing Jacob Markstrom, big 6-year deal, and Chris Tanev to 4 years. Some big changes on the back end. How do you think Backstrom's play is going to really impact and help this team?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's so early now that I think we're going to really start to see a sense of what it looks like now as we get an opportunity with this condensed schedule, because, I think the Flames had a great goaltending duo last year. But when you get an opportunity to bring in a guy like Jacob Markstrom, it's a significant boost to your goaltending tandem. And I say, you get a better sense because in a 56 condensed game schedule, and you start to look at it over 116 days, I believe, in terms of the regular season, I think more than ever, it's important to make sure you have depth at that position. And we've seen, already early in this season, different teams claiming potential third string goaltenders on waivers, just because you're going to need that depth at some point or another. Obviously, Jacob Markstrom, one of the better goaltenders in the National Hockey League over the last couple of years. So that alone, shows you that there's potential there for it to be an upgrade. But just to have him along with David Riddick, who, people forget was an all-star last year. These were the 2 goaltenders that represented the Pacific Division and are now on the same team. This duo has a chance to be very, very good for the Calgary Flames, but among the better ones for sure in the North Division and particularly in the NHL, just because of the body of work that we've seen and the potential that's there.
You've talked about having good depth, and with those changes on the back end, in comes on defense the young first rounder from 2017, Välimäki. Could this be a bit of a breakout and year for him and being a solid defenseman that they're going to need back there?
Yeah, without question. I think Juuso Välimäki is a very interesting story because it's been some time since he played in the National Hockey League. And I was just looking through it today, actually. April 19th of 2019 was his last NHL game. So, you're kind of looking at over a year and 9 months ago. Now he had an opportunity to play 19 games in the Finnish Elite League, which obviously helped him. But, this is a guy that's overcome a ton of adversity in his young career already. The knee injury that he's battled back from. And more than anything, he's just such a mature kid. And you'll start to see signs of that. His puck awareness, the way that he's so calm and composed when the puck's on his stick is one thing that's really going to stand out to people as they watch him. And now it's about reps. I think he played in the season opener, he played, just over 14 and a half minutes. So it's kind of an easing in process now, starting on that third pairing for the Calgary Flames. But I think you'll see a guy who, as he continues to get those reps and that confidence built back up, will continue to move up the lineup just because he's got all the assets that you would want in a defenseman in today's day and age. He can skate it well, good with the puck, good offensive awareness, but also very strong in his own zone too. So absolutely could be a breakout year for Juuso Välimäki.
I'll keep my eye out for him for sure. Johnny Hockey has always been entertaining, but what does he really need to do to shut down his critics?
Critics, to be honest, I don't know that. I mean, he'll probably say the same thing. I don't know that you're ever going to completely shut them out. I think there'll always be critics because, hey, that's what it's like playing in a Canadian market. But I think a little bit more of what we saw in the opener is what it's going to take to shut out a lot of them because at the end of the day, Johnny Gaudreau is a guy that you want to see offense from, and he wants to be a guy that provides that offense. So, he talked throughout training camp about his approach coming into this season, and there's always going to be critics. But the one thing about this lineup that you'll now see, and it's because of the depth that the pieces they've added over the offseason, guys like Josh Levo, Joakim Nordstrom, Dominic Simone, there's other options now, and it's allowed them to kind of change up their forward pairings, lines. I say pairings because they're kind of going with pairings. It's Johnny, it's Monty, something we've seen for a long time. But now with Elias Lindholm moving to the center, playing with Matthew Tkachuk, that provides different matchups for the opposition to focus on, which could free up guys like Johnny and Monty to start to provide that scoring punch that we've become so accustomed to, and maybe get a little bit more friendlier of a matchup in terms of the opposition, and just maybe also just plain and simple, take a bit of the stress, a bit of the weight of providing that offense night in and night out. It should be spread out a little bit more throughout the lineup. And I expect to see, those goal totals, those point totals from those two guys kind of bounce back.
I've mentioned a couple of times already on the podcast about checking the website to see everybody's predictions, and you'll get Brendan's as well. When we're talking about the Flames, I don't think many people expect the Flames to be near the top of the division, but why not? What am I missing here that the rest of the Scotia division have over them?
You know what I've seen a number of different predictions, and it's been pretty widespread. I don't know about what you've seen, but from Toronto to I know a lot of people love what Montreal's done over the offseason, and understandably so. Josh Anderson looked great in the early going. And then you could throw in Edmonton's and Vancouver's in there. Obviously what Vancouver did in the playoffs a year ago would bring you some confidence as well. I think for that reason alone, it really provides an idea of what we're going to see this season. And it's going to be a tough division. I think these teams for a lot of the breakdown, if you went through it all, there's a lot of parity in this division. And Ottawa is kind of a wild card to me because of what they've done over the offseason. Obviously they're young, they're going to be exciting. But they're not going to be an easy out. And so I think for me, that's more than anything what it says is that it's going to be a tough division. I absolutely give Calgary a chance to be at the top when it's all said and done because of everything we just kind of described. I mean, Markstrom in net, that's going to be one of the formidable goaltending tandems in the division. The offense has every opportunity to be as explosive as it looks on paper. And their defense with Chris Tanev on there and maybe the rise of Juuso Välimäki. He's playing alongside Nikita Nesterov, who's spent the last 3 years in the KHL. This is his first year back in the National Hockey League after spending some time in Tampa Bay and Montreal. He looks more than comfortable and a really good fit alongside Juuso Välimäki. So it's all there. All the pieces are there, but it's always about how it transfers to the ice. So I give them every opportunity to be at the top of the division, but it won't be easy.
We all know of the Battle of Alberta, but is there a new rivalry brewing within this division? I can see a lot of hate between them and the Jets in the playoff bubble and even in that first game.
I think that's the beauty of all of it, is that absolutely everyone's going to look forward to those 10 dates against Edmonton without a doubt. But Winnipeg, I mean, I think we saw a little bit of that hatred, a little bit of that fuel in the season opener. I think Vancouver, it's always really been there, and it comes kind of in flashes. But now with two teams being good, being competitive, I could see that bubbling up. I mean, you got the Tkachuk brothers, if you want to start to look at it, Ottawa versus Calgary. I think every single matchup on every single night through 56 games has the potential to break out at any point with some rivalry, some heat. That's exciting. So absolutely, I think Winnipeg's up there. And the beauty of it is there might be rivalries born that we aren't even thinking about right now. When you're playing each other 9-10 times a season, buckle up, because I think it's got every opportunity to provide some fireworks.
It's going to be a fun season. You can find him on Twitter at BParkerTV. It was good talking to you, Brenden.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Let's head to the City of Champions, and now we have Brenden Escott. He's the producer of Oilers Now on 630 The Ched in Edmonton. You can find him on Twitter at Brenden Escott. Welcome to the show, Brenden.
Hey, thanks, Peter. I appreciate you allowing me to be the voice of Oilers Nation, even if it's just for a quick hitter here. This is awesome.
I've had Reed on the show a couple times, so it's cool to get you on the show a bit too. So let's go straight up with the Oilers here. If we go back to the bubble, the Oilers were upset by Team 12 in the qualifiers, the Blackhawks. So it was actually a pretty big offseason I think they had. Mike Green retired. They moved on from a few guys, including Athanasiou. And then pieces kind of started coming together. One of them being Jesse Puljujarvi signing back with a 2-year deal. And, of course, they brought in Turris and Tyson Barrie on 1-year deals. For Barrie, what kind of impact do you see that he will bring that will really improve the Oilers?
Well, the biggest difference in Tyson Barrie and what he brings to this team, and maybe more specifically the power play, is he's a shooter, right? Versus what they've gotten out of Oscar Klefbom previously, and in terms of relying on him as a number one guy, 5-on-5, or suddenly quarterbacking your number one power play unit. They were looking for a different dimension, and even in the first game against Vancouver, you could really see the shooter's mentality of Barrie. So they haven't changed the power play so much, but Barrie's presence has allowed them to open up some different looks, some different reads, and maybe some more shots from the top. So even if you want to really narrow in on one aspect of the game, I mean, that's huge for Barrie. The question is going to be, is he able to get it done defensively? And is he the player we saw in Colorado, or is he the player that we saw really struggle to fit in under Mike Babcock in Toronto last year and ultimately get run out of town? So there's a lot of potential there, probably more so on the offensive side of things, but so far so good.
I mentioned Puljujarvi. Are you expecting pretty much the same of him, or what's going to change this time around?
It seems that he's more mature off the ice, and that was really, as we understand it, the big inhibitor in him having success here the last time around. He wasn't comfortable with even the language, and maybe not understanding his role in the system. And frankly, I think the onus, it has to be put on the coaching staff and how they used him as well, in the sense that this is a guy who wanted to go out and sort of have a longer leash offensively, and they were asking him to do different things. So the player needed to grow up, but this system is obviously a different one than he left as well. So you've got a guy who, at the offensive side of this, that's where he wanted to, be producing and be a guy for the Oilers. Well, he needed to regain some confidence in that department. He was able to do that over in Finland, and that's not necessarily, an upper echelon league in terms of the competition that he's been playing, but he comes back over here and he's just in a different mindset, I think, more so than anything else. So he's going to start on the third line for this team and see if he can work his way up into maybe a top 6 role. But in the meantime, he's got to keep the respect of his teammates and understand that he's going to have to work and earn this role in the lineup on a nightly basis.
You mentioned Oscar Cluffbaum. He's on IR. How long is he going to be out for?
It'll be a season-long thing for Oscar. Okay. It seems like, and we hadn't heard from him in quite some time. Mm-hmm. He talked to the media a little earlier on this week and said that, he was talking in terms of just the negative impact on his personal life and how much that started to factor into the decision to have surgery, which is a longer-term thing. It'll be, I believe they're talking a 6 to 9 month recovery period for Oscar. So start of next season, most realistically. And they'll have to, in the meantime, figure out how to properly allocate that money that is freed up by the fact that his contract's not on the books.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm with Cluffbaum being out for the whole year because it looks like the top dog is Darnell Nurse. Is he kind of ready for that role?
I think it's about time that he takes a step forward into the player that this team drafted, 7th or 8th overall several years ago. He's had a penchant for skating the puck up the ice. Now it's about, can you figure out how to be a puck moving defenseman and complementary to Ethan Bear, who's been playing there and takes on a lot more of that. But Darnell's got to limit the mistakes, right? I think that a lot of people look at him and are probably going to be more willing to live with those the mistakes if he's producing more offensively, but on the opposite end of that scale, he's got to limit. He's got to be a smart player in his own end in order to be on the ice in the situations where he can help create offense and jump in the rush and that sort of thing. Now, he's a player who is considered part of the leadership team. I know he's good friends on and off the ice with Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, etc. So, he's part of the core of this franchise. And I think that if they're all going to take a step forward, he's got to be a huge part of it.
I've been talking about it every single divisional episode, and we're getting the predictions from everybody for the website. You can check it out on the game notes for this episode. JablamSports.com/podcast. This one is specifically for season 6, episode 6, season preview, the Scotia NHL North Division. I don't think a lot of people know exactly what we're getting from the Oilers this year. Where do you see them at season's end in this Scotia division?
Well, you got to remember that. I mean, if you're going off of the recency bias, you'll remember a pretty poor performance in the play-in division or the play-in series, against Chicago. Mm-hmm. And nothing about that was good by the admission of most people in that franchise. So if you rewind further than that, though, they were the best team winning percentage wise of the Canadian teams when the season was paused on March 13th last year. So, which group is this? And I'd like to believe that they've made enough of the improvements in the offseason to add the depth to this roster that they haven't had in a long time. You mentioned Jesse Puljujärvi. Well, how about Kyle Turris as well? And getting to re-sign a guy like Tyler Ennis might not resonate around the rest of the hockey world, but that was a big signing for Edmonton to be able to bring a guy like Tyler Ennis back and have that depth and just added competition. Now, when James Neal comes back, there's got to be a hunger amongst those guys who are either in and out of the taxi squad or whatever it may be, to accelerate their own play. So all of this to say that I think that there's enough internal competition, and coupled with the fact that this team isn't actually as bad as a lot of people seem to think that they are. This is a top 2 team in your Scotia North Division. They'll be competing with Toronto, I believe. It's terrible for me to sit here as the Edmonton guy and say that Edmonton is going to be at the top of this division when it's said and done. You have the 2 best players in the world on the same team. So if they're able to get the most out of Leon and Connor as they have over the last couple of years, and you got to have good goaltending as well, I think that this is potentially you're looking at the best team in the division. They're definitely a playoff team, but I'll call them as the best team.
In this Scotia North Division, we all know about the Battle of Alberta, but will there grow to be one other rival team just as big as that one during this season? It's a lot of games.
It is a lot of games, and you look to the West, and I think Vancouver is a pretty good answer to that question because they are playing each other 10 times, the same way that the Oilers are with Calgary, and just the nature of the beast that's going to generate some animosity that way. And Vancouver's got their agitators as well in the form of an Anton Roussel, a Jay Beagle, guys that are willing to engage, a Jake Virtanen, for example. So I can definitely see down the stretch. And we might even see a little bit of it tonight, in the second half of a back-to-back against this team already. I'm very excited to see if that is the one that materializes, personally, because I'm the BC kid that's working in Alberta now. Mm-hmm. So that'd be awesome to watch. But I think that there's enough pieces that could play into that, both from the Oilers and from Vancouver, to make that a healthy rivalry. And for years to come, they're both really good young teams.
And you can find him on Twitter at Brenden Escott. It was great chatting with you, Brenden.
Thanks, Peter.
Let's head to Sin City. Is that what they call it, Ian? Sin City? They call Montreal Sin City? I thought that was Vegas.
That sounds like Vegas.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. I'm from Connecticut.
Yeah, I know that. It's just weird when because I've been doing the whole, this is Stampede City for Calgary or this and that. And I'm like, Sin City, Montreal? Really? It is because of the old tradition of, the nightlife and some of the extracurriculars that you can really do in Montreal that it's not as prominent in maybe especially the rest of Canada. So I could see why they call it Sin City. So of course, Ian Boisvert is here talking to me. Of course, he's deputy editor at Rabid Habs, and he's a part of the Nosebleeds cast. You can find him on Twitter at Maybe It's Ian. Welcome back to the show, Ian.
Thanks, Peter. It's nice hearing you again. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm geared up. We saw opening night, Montreal-Toronto. That was a blast. I'm glad to see William Nylander play even better. His accuracy looks better, but let's just jump right to it. Josh Anderson in the Domi deal, that was the swap there, but he had a good first game. What kind of impact is he going to bring to the team that, they traded for him? They gave him a big 7-year deal, 5.5. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the size is what attracted, Marc Bergevin to go make that move. Montreal, as long as I can remember, the argument has been they're not big enough. Going back to, this team has had several iterations of rebuilds or retools. I think back to 2010 when Gomez joined and Gianta and Camilleri all joined, mm-hmm. They were real small.
They were the Smurfs. No?
Yeah, it was the Smurf line. Yeah, because they all played on the same line. Mm-hmm. But, getting that size on the wing, I think, especially on that line that he's playing on, Anderson is currently on the right wing of Nick Suzuki down the middle and Jonathan Drouin on the left side. He adds such a grit that we haven't seen in a long time. His first goal he scored on a set play in the slot. He just ripped a shot off the post. His shot looks pretty good. But his second goal is the one that I think we're going to see a lot of, where he's coming down, especially on his off wing, and he'll just put his shoulder into the guy on the inside and drive him to the net. Mm-hmm. Not to, keep remembering old Canadians, but Eric Cole, when he was in Montreal, that was the sort of thing Eric Cole did, was he just put his shoulder down and pushed to the front of the net. Man, he's fast too. I watching him in camp, watching the pregame or the scrimmages before the season, he just flies. And, the saying that's been going around Montreal is he's just fast. He's not fast for a big guy. He's just fast. So I'm really excited to see him. Like you said, that contract might stink a little bit towards the end, but so is the Carey Price one. So is the Weber one. It's very clear that the window is now, that we're pushing into, our most competitive years.
They've also added Jake Allen and obviously Toffoli, Edmondson, the list goes on, but you've mentioned Carey Price and his contract. So now with adding Jake Allen, that's about 15 million of cap space tied up in goaltending. But it could be a really good move, especially for this type of season. How are they going to handle the ice time between Allen and Price for this year at least? Yeah,
I'm hoping that we don't see Carey Price in back-to-backs at all. I don't at this point, I don't think there's a reason for it. You might play Allen on the first half of the back-to-back while the team is fresher, and then play Price on the second half. Because he can probably bail out a more tired and worn-out Canadiens team. I'm interested to see how this plays out because, looking at the schedule, the Canadiens have, I think it's 11 back-to-back games, which is quite a lot, especially considering that, the North, I'm not calling it the North Division, the Canadian Division, they're the only division where we're going from the Eastern time zone to the Western time zone. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So I think the Allen pickup, they paid a lot. They're going to pay him a lot of money this year. But if they can use him and Carey Price stays fresh and we make it to the playoffs and he's, the Carey Price we saw in the bubble last year because of all that rest he had, the move is completely justified and the dollar amount won't matter.
We saw what can happen in the bubble playoffs with some young superstars like Nick Suzuki and Kotkaniemi. What kind of season are both of these kids going to have?
I'll start with Kotkaniemi, because I think before Suzuki was even around, it was sort of, we looked at him as you're going to be the next star. He's still sort of I think he's a little bit of a project, not in the sense that like he's going to go back down to the AHL. I think those days are behind him. But he does need to work on some stuff. He's not particularly great in the faceoff dot. Montreal always seems to get centers who can't figure that out right away. But he uses his body so well. It seems like he's become more confident in the way that he wants to move the puck. He'll make an extra move to try to beat a guy, which, in his rookie season, he might not have done. In Toronto against Toronto, and we've only got the 1 game sample size for this year so far, but he looks to be a guy who's going to try to beat you with his skill now, which is exciting. I mean, we usually haven't had a ton of guys like that. And Suzuki's the same. I mean, everyone that I talked to, I was on the phone last night with my old college roommate who was a Red Wings fan, and the first thing he said to me was, "This Suzuki kid looks like a stud." And everyone in Montreal's fallen in love with this kid. He does everything right. He back checks. He plays defense so well, but on offense, he's one of the more dynamic forwards we've had. I can't think of a center or even a winger that we've had that has, been able to play both ends of the ice as well as he has. And I think that that's rubbing off on a guy like Jonathan Drouin, who was paired with him in the bubble and might actually start figuring it out in Montreal for the first time in his career. Those two guys are driving the bus for this team. They're, the old adage for the Canadiens is this team will go as far as Carey Price takes them. I think you've got to throw Kotkaniemi and Suzuki into that.
We'll have everybody's predictions for the Scotia NHL North Division. I know you want to call it the Canadian Division. I'm going to go all out and say Scotia NHL North Division. Most people have Montreal in one of those top 3 spots in the Scotia North Division. That seems pretty impressive to me. Why do so many people believe that, Ian?
I think, they don't have the star power that a lot of the other teams have. They don't have a Matthews or a Marner. They can't compete with Toronto's top end players. They can't compete with a Draisaitl or a McDavid or a Paterson in Vancouver. I don't think they have guys like that. But what they do have are 4 really, really good lines and 3 really, really good pairs of defensemen. They've got Victor Mete, who I'm a big fan of, and I think they should find more ways to implement in the lineup. He's scratched. They've got Corey Perry on the taxi squad until they can bank enough cap space to call him up. This team, I mean, and that's to say that they did add a lot offensively. They added Josh Anderson, who's got 25 goal potential in an 82 game season. Toffoli, who's about the same, maybe around 25 goals. But it's the depth for me that I think will help them get through this season. That's going to be a real grind. I do think, I've tried to keep a level head about it. We haven't seen these guys play a ton. They looked really good in the first game, but even before that, I was trying to pump the brakes a little bit on the excitement. Mm-hmm. But it's hard not to be excited. I mean, they look great. Romanoff on the back end looks like he's going to be a stud. There's lots to be excited about for the first time in a really long time for this franchise.
I've been asking people for their top rivals from everybody, and of course everybody as per usual, sees the whole Maple Leafs versus Habs rivalry. Is there somebody else that might perk up playing them 9 or 10 times this season?
Yeah, I mean, Montreal's got 10 against Ottawa, and I mean, I think it's just they know those two teams the most. So even though Ottawa's not going to be that, I don't think they're going to be all that competitive this year. We'll see how well Stützle's going to be the reason you tune into those games.
Yeah.
But I think Brady Tkachuk drives me nuts. Both the Tkachuks do, but we've seen Brady so much over the past few years that I don't think any of those games against them should be seen as gimmies. Ottawa can press Montreal's buttons. They need to take them seriously. And again, they're playing them 10 times. So familiarity is going to breed contempt in this division. It's been fun. Even after one game against the Leafs, we're feeling it. Like there's just a buzz around the whole division, and there's no off night. So we got to go play Edmonton. We're setting up for a series against Edmonton, and then we're off to Vancouver. And then eventually we're going to play a home game. I don't know when it is, but yeah, it should be good. I'm, really looking forward to literally every game this year.
I don't know why, but it just seems already more intense. And I don't know if anybody from Calgary or Winnipeg is going to last the season the way they're playing and the way they already hate each other from the bubble and in their first game of the season. Wow. Again, you can find him on Twitter at Maybe It's Ian. It was great chatting with you again, Ian.
You bet. Thanks, Peter.
Let's go to the capital of the Scotia North and chat with Colin Cudmore. He's the writer and editor at Silver Seven Sens. You can find him on Twitter at Cudmore Colin. Colin, welcome back to the show.
Always great to be here, Peter. Thanks so much for having me again.
So the Sens obviously didn't make it to the bubble, but they did draft the 3rd overall Tim Stützle, who looked phenomenal at the World Juniors for Germany. Where is he going to play in the lineup predominantly?
It's really anybody's call at this point. It seems like he's going to be getting a shot in the top 6 if we're looking just at training camp lines. Although I'm sure there's going to be some sort of adjustment period for him. I think we talked about this on the last time I was on here too. There's probably going to be a little bit of adjustment, a bit of a road bump, but I think they're going to give him every single chance that they're going to have. Whether he's playing alongside maybe Josh Norris in the top 6, which is another rookie that they could be having in. Maybe he'll be alongside Dadonov. Maybe he'll be alongside Brady Tkachuk. It's really anybody's call whose actual line mates are going to be, but we know that he's going to be given a shot, and then it's going to be so much fun to watch regardless.
Bobby Ryan was bought out. Borowitzki, Ron Hainsey, Craig Anderson. The list goes on. They didn't even bring back Anthony Duclair, who had a pretty good, decent season. Dadonov signs for 3 years. Galchenyuk for the 1 year. And in comes Matt Murray, the 2-time Stanley Cup champion, 4-year deal. What does he bring to this team that they really haven't had actually in another goaltender in a while, I guess? But I know you're maybe not a big fan.
Yeah. The range of outcomes from Matt Murray is pretty endless at this point. And Craig Anderson was the greatest goaltender in franchise history, like aside from maybe Dominic Hasek, who was there for a little bit. Anderson in his tenure has accomplished something that no other goaltender has in Sens history, the way he's played for them. But Matt Murray's going to try and fill those shoes. He was not good last year, Matt Murray, but he has been good in the past. He's been like Stanley Cup championship, like caliber. We've seen how well he can do in those moments. So I'm a bit bearish on Murray. I think that he'll probably be somewhere in the middle there. I think that the fact that last season was his worst season to date is not really looking too hot. And the fact they're going to be relying on him to try and get to that a higher level again is maybe not the best choice on the Sens' part. But it's not like they had many options to go with. And I mean, we'll see where it goes. But there's so many different ways that this could head.
Everyone is talking about Makar, Hughes, Heiskanen. But what about Thomas? Could Shabbat really break out and be talked about in the same tier as the others? And in that Norris talk, I think he should, at least maybe even this year.
Potentially. I mean, you look at 2 seasons ago, he was already up there as one of the best defensemen in the league. And last year was a bit of a tougher year. And some of that had to do with his defensive partners. He was playing mostly alongside Nikita Zaitsev, who was one of the worst defensemen in the league. So that was certainly didn't help much. But I guess this season is not going to be too much better in that regard. The Sens are starting him alongside Eric Goodbranson, which again, not a good option. And you look down the Sens right side and it is tumultuous. You have Zaitsev again. You have Josh Brown is like their next guy.
Mm-hmm.
Christian Jaros maybe could get a few games in. But Chabot on his own, though, we see how well he can get past the anchors and really break out as a star defenseman in the league. And I think he's already done that to an extent in the NHL. Also, keep in mind that he is 24, so he's a bit older than the guys you mentioned as well.
Yeah.
But I don't see how Norris Talk could be in play. I don't see how it couldn't be. He's really in that top echelon right now. But yeah, Chabot, I have him as my pick for the Sens MVP in the next year or so, but he's a fun player.
We have everybody's predictions, including Colin's, on our game notes for this podcast. Go to jblamsports.com/podcasts. And this episode specifically is Season 6, Episode 6, Season Preview, the Scotia NHL North Division. Everyone expects the Sens to be at the basement of the North. Basement of the North. Sounds like an oxymoron. Colin, do you see the exact same for them in the Scotia division?
As much as I'd love to give you some optimistic hot take here, I personally think that, it's another basement season for the Sens. Potentially last in the league, too. I wouldn't rule that out either, but it's they're currently on paper at least the weakest team in the division.
What would take them to be sixth out of the 7 teams? What would it take?
Honestly, I think that comes down to the other teams more. I think goaltending switches a lot of that, and as we mentioned with Matt Murray, if he can be even average, and some other goalie in the division starts to plummet, then I think that could be on its own be enough to bring them up. Also, big performances from the rookies as well is going to be another big play in the young players. Guys like Drake Batherson, Josh Norris, I mentioned. If Tim Stützle is a star right away, that is massive for them. And even though their depth is looking pretty terrible and their center depth is looking not so hot as well, I think you mentioned the list of departures. I think Jean-Gabriel Pageau is another one that's worth mentioning in there as well. He played a fantastic before he left for the Islanders. But yeah, it'll take some strong performances from the rookies and a decent performance from their goalie. And that's, those are the kind of the keys for success, I guess, this season.
It's a jam-packed schedule. I know this episode's already coming out a little bit later, but we're recording this during the first week. The Leafs and the Sens 5 times in the first month? It's insane. A lot of games, like 10 games. Is that the main rivalry for the Sens, or is it going to be another one that's going to be a bigger rivalry this season in this division?
This is where I'm going to throw my hot take a bit. I think it's going to be the Habs. I despise the Habs so much you don't even know. Those rivalries in the playoffs, the Pageau game, it's legendary in my mind, but there's also so many like other small moments, like the refs making bad calls and calling back an early play on Pageau, and I think 2013 that was one of the most treacherous moments in my hockey fandom. And maybe there'll be bigger rivals with the Leafs. I don't know, the Ontario rivalry thing, but I just don't see how the Sens are going to stack up to the Leafs in the games. The Leafs are just that much better of a team, whereas the Sens like to get pesky, the Habs like to get pesky. I think those teams are going to have some sparks fly. Sleeper pick is going to be Calgary. The Tkachuk brothers going head to head. That's just going to be so much chaos and so much fun that maybe not rivalries, but there could be some sparks flying in those games for sure. But Habs, my pick, at least.
Yeah, the Tkachuk brothers against each other would be dynamite to watch. Again, you can find them on Twitter at Cudmore Colin. Thanks for stopping by, Colin.
Awesome. Thanks again for having me. Always a pleasure.
Now we head just down the street from me in the center of the universe, and we'll chat with Justin Cuthbert. He covers the Maple Leafs for Yahoo Sports. You can find him on Twitter at JC Cuthbert. Welcome to the Jablam Sports Hockey Podcast, Justin.
Thanks for having me on.
So we all kind of know how the bubble went for the Leafs. They lost in the qualifying round. That was the only one that went the distance to the Blue Jackets. And we do know who lost to the Blue Jackets the previous year. Right? And what happened to them the following year, the Tampa Bay Lightning. So maybe that's a good omen for the Leafs this year. We'll see. In the offseason, of course, you might say it was a pretty good one. The Leafs, Barry's out, Clifford, Marleau, and they traded away Kapanen and Janssen. It's a fair bit gone. And in comes TJ Brodie, Wayne Simmons, Zach Bogosian, and Joe Thornton. What kind of impact will TJ Brodie bring for that defense?
I think a pretty considerable one. I think they've been looking for someone to sort of solidify the top four for a very long time. And you talk about all these big names that the Maple Leafs just brought in, Wayne Simmons, Joe Thornton, et cetera, et cetera. But what they really needed was a guy who wasn't necessarily a big name. Now, TJ Brodie has a name, obviously, but just a guy who you're not going to notice that much on the ice, a guy who can sort of accentuate the play of Morgan Rielly, and a guy that can make Morgan Rielly just be Morgan Rielly because he's not trying to cover off for mistakes that are either being made by Cody Ceci or Ron Hainsey or so on and so forth. He hasn't really had that opportunity to play with a guy who's considered reliable. And I think that's TJ Brodie's best asset, as being a reliable defenseman. Now, I don't know if he's the perfect fit. I mean, it was a off season where there was links to Alex Pietrangelo, and what that would have meant for the Leafs, I don't really know. But TJ Brodie is I don't even think they paid a pandemic price for him, but it's not a albatross of a contract. Certainly a guy that's going to help. I think we saw the benefits of having TJ Brodie, just the one game that we've seen so far. And that meant not really seeing much, which is exactly what the Maple Leafs want. They want some quietness out of that position. And I think TJ Brodie is going to provide just that.
I'm glad that you kind of mentioned in the last 2-3 years, the Leafs have had Ron Hainsey and Ceci in the top four. And now they have a guy like TJ Brodie. So that, just looking at that, is a big step up, as you can see where, Ceci and Hainsey are this year. When we're looking at the top shelf level players on the Leafs, you might say that maybe Marner and Tavares didn't have such a stellar year last year. Will Tavares get back to that big kind of year that he can have this year?
I think the most encouraging thing from a Leafs fan perspective in the opening game was the fact that John Tavares was moving around the ice very, very well. I don't want to make something more than it really is, but John Tavares having certainly a step back season from his brilliant debut with the Maple Leafs was not, I wouldn't say problematic yet, but at least raise your eyebrows, because if he's going to continue on a downward trajectory throughout the life of his career with the Maple Leafs, by year 5, 6, 7, it's going to be a significant problem at $11 million. So the fact that he dealt with injuries, he dealt with changes in his life. He became a father for the first time, missed the first bit of training camp. Immediately, I think broke his hand or broke his thumb, kind of in the first month as well. I mean, it just didn't really go right for him. But the fact that he's had some time off, looks like he's been working on his skating and continuing to refine that craft, which has never been a strength for him. The fact that he was moving around the ice really, really well is definitely a huge thing. Can he keep that up for a 56-game schedule, condensed, playing 3 games at 4 nights and 5 and 7 sometimes? I don't really know. But the fact that John Tavares looked a little bit closer to the year 1 Tavares than the year 2 Tavares in just one game is a big, big thing for the Maple Leafs, I think.
Which of the young big 3 top forwards will take another step up? Mitch, Willie, or Austin?
I think Austin Matthews, you can probably peg him for a step up in his talent level each and every year, but maybe the guy who takes the biggest step, I think, might be William Nylander. If there's a second thing that you noticed from the opening game against Montreal, is the fact that William Nylander's skill set looks to be a little bit more enhanced. I mean, his goals were very, very impressive. His ability to control the puck, handle the puck, his shot, the subtleness in which it was coming off his stick was very, very impressive to me. I thought he turned some heads, and that could mean a lot playing with John Tavares for the whole year. If he's at, that level that I just discussed, it could mean big things for William Nylander, who's never really threatened, top 20, 10 scoring. I think top 10 scoring might be in the cards if he, it might be a little bit difficult if he doesn't get those PP1 minutes with Wayne Simmons and Joe Thornton getting the edge on him right now. But if he gets back onto that number 1 power play, which should be lethal, and he's playing with John Tavares all year and they can continue to build on their partnership, I think William Nylander could have a huge year. And that would, I guess, be the bigger step, because Austin's going to make gradual steps forward every year. I think you could bank on that. I think Mitch Marner is going to have a return to challenging in the top 10 of scoring as well. But I think maybe the biggest difference might go to William Nylander.
We will have everybody's predictions, including Justin's, on our game notes for this podcast. Go to jablamsports.com/podcasts. This episode specifically, Season 6, Episode 6, Season Preview, the Scotia NHL North Division. Leafs are considered probably the favorite amongst everybody. What would change in order for them to drop a little bit in terms of what everybody thinks they would be being atop of this division?
That's a great question. The Leafs, I don't know if they deserve this based on, what they are in the context of the entire league, but they are the biggest favorites to win their division, even over the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are not in a very strong division. So that was a little bit surprising to me when I was looking at the odds coming into the year. I would say, any team, if they lose their starting goaltender, that might be the thing that changes and hurts them the most. But there's a lot of confidence in Jack Campbell as well. And then they have, solidified that third goaltender position with Aaron Dell. They protected him, didn't let him go through waivers, and he'd be able to step in. Obviously, they wouldn't be in as good hands with Jack Campbell and Aaron Dell. But I think the worst thing that could happen to the Maple Leafs would be losing Austin Matthews if he goes down to injury for a prolonged period of time. I think that could change the balance of power, but I think the Maple Leafs do deserve to be the favorites in the North Division. I'm not convinced they're going to win, but I definitely think they should be considered favorites because I do believe they're the strongest team on paper.
We know the usual enemies of the Leafs, the Sens, Montreal. Could there be a new rival within this Scotia division, maybe out west?
Well, I think all these teams are going to end up being rivals with each other because as we've seen through the first couple nights of the year, that it's just immediately it snaps to this competitiveness. And when you play each other 9 or 10 times, it's just automatically going to percolate. I mean, you saw Patrick Laine and Matthew Tkachuk going at it in night 1. They're going to play each other 9 more times. That's pretty much like 2 playoff series not in a row. They're obviously going to be played over the course of a few months. But I feel like every team and every matchup, there's going to be some bad blood that builds up. I think it's probably you lean towards the more competitive teams. I don't necessarily think Winnipeg is going to challenge for the North Division title, but I could definitely see some bad blood there. And I think Calgary has all the recipe for that as well, because they just have the protagonist, or I guess the antagonist, if you look at it from a Leafs perspective. But I think everything's going to build up. I think Ottawa's going to be a little nasty with the Maple Leafs. I think it's going to, especially with the additions of Wayne Simmons and Joe Thornton, everything's going to get raised a little bit in terms of temperature. And I think we're going to see some time-honored, animosity and some new animosity, as you sort of alluded to.
You can get him on Twitter at JC Cuthbert. Thanks for joining me, Justin.
Appreciate it, Peter.
Here's a quick break from all those interviews. I hope you are enjoying this episode. Remember to please subscribe to our podcast, Jablam Sports Hockey, on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, check out our website if you haven't done so already, jablamsports.com. These episodes, the divisional preview episodes, are on Season 6, Episodes 3 to 6. Please check them out. You can go on our podcast pages and find them there as well. To all of our guests' infos, you can get all those there. Players to look out for and their predictions for the entire division are on those episode pages. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Jablam Sports. That's JABLAM Sports. Now back to our regular scheduled programming. Let's go to Van City and talk to Jeff Paterson. He's on Canucks Radio, TSN 1040. He's also on the Athletic podcast for the Canucks. You can get him on Twitter at Paterson Jeff. Welcome to the Jablam Sports Hockey Podcast, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So let's get right to Canucks talk. They lost in the offseason Markstrom, Tanev, Toffoli, all to other Scotia North teams. And then they went and added Braden Holtby to a 2-year contract. How do you think Holtby will fit in on this Canucks team?
I think he'll fit in fine. I don't know Braden Holtby, the person, an awful lot, having played in Washington and covering the Canucks all the years that I have, but everybody that I've talked to says the same thing, that this guy is a good goaltender, but a better person and a terrific teammate, and I think he'll fit in just fine. I think the challenge for Holtby is this is the first time in his career that he has switched cities and teams, and so I think there will be an adjustment, but I know that he's excited the few times that we've talked to him via Zoom. He's excited about coming to a Canadian market, even though in these strange times, it's not going to be the same as, the full building every night and just that fever that people have for hockey, but he'll get there eventually. So I think he'll fit in fine. And he looked good in his debut. the season opener against the Oilers, posting a victory there. And so, I think that probably just puts his mind at ease, get the first one, hopefully for him, the first of many. But, he's not chasing that first win a week or 2 weeks into the season. So he gets that one kind of, I think, probably puts him in a proper headspace. And look, he's a veteran guy. The last 3 seasons have not been great statistically, sub 900 save percentage last year in Washington. So, I think he sees this as a little bit of a rebirth, the chance to work with Ian Clark, who is one of the top goaltending coaches in the National Hockey League. You think of the work that he did with Sergei Bobrovsky in Columbus. Look at the work that he did with Jacob Markstrom here in Vancouver the last couple of years. So I know Holtby has expressed his excitement. The minute he signed, he was on the phone with Ian Clark. They've worked on some adjustments, and I think they're starting to take hold. So it's a long season, obviously, and there's going to be ups and downs. But I think Braden Holtby looks at this as a challenge. The challenge for him might be, if he's not the guy every night, then that changes your practice habits. It changes the way you approach your job. And so I think it's an open competition here with Thatcher Demko right off the hop. And I think they're likely to split the first bunch of games, maybe the first 10 or 12. And then the Canucks probably will take stock of where they are with their goaltending. But, so far so good for Holtby. And I think he is looking forward to the change of scenery and just kind of trying to, seamlessly fit in with the new hockey club.
The first win is a good omen for him. A move I really liked from Vancouver is the trade with Vegas, acquiring Nate Schmidt for a 3rd-round pick. If it was a full season, I think he would get at least 15 goals. Where will he help the team most?
That might be a little ambitious on the goal total. He's never been a big goal scorer. I think he's got a career high of 7, and he's played on pretty good teams. But he is a point producer, and he generates offense. And look, the Canucks have Quinn Hughes, who has changed the discussion out here in Vancouver of what's possible for defensemen. 50 years, they celebrated their 50th season last year. They've never had anything like Quinn Hughes. So we'll probably come back and talk more about Quinn Hughes, but Quinn Hughes alone sort of changed the conversation. Nate Schmidt's not at Quinn Hughes' level, but he does think offense, and he's able to generate offense. This guy loves to get around the ice. He skates so well that he can jump up into the rush, but also feel comfortable that he's going to be able to get back and defend. And we've already seen that from him through training camp, some of the scrimmages, scored his first goal. So he has one in the bag now against the Oilers. And, he's an excitable guy off the ice. We've come to sort of find that out about Nate Schmidt. And I think his personality sort of carries over to the way that he plays. And so now the Canucks have Quinn Hughes, but they also have Nate Schmidt. And so, if they play and they're not paired together generally, so if Hughes plays 25 minutes a night and Schmidt somewhere in 20, there you've got 45 minutes where you've got an offensive driver, a guy that transitions the puck well from his own end. I think it's going to help the Canucks attack overall. And then they've kind of got this wild card that when they're trailing, Travis Greenhow has this luxury of pairing Hughes and Schmidt and sort of pushing the turbo boost button, when they're looking for that goal or goals that they need to get back in a hockey game. And I think it's going to be fun to see the two of those guys play together. I guess the danger is maybe they both get stuck in behind the opponent's net because they love to be up ice as much as they are. But I think it's going to be wildly entertaining to see what is possible with Quinn Hughes and Nate Schmidt on the ice together. But I'm like you. I think it was a good trade. They recognized that Vegas was in a bit of a cap pinch and they were able to poach there. And that's life in the new NHL. You have to find the inequities and make the most of them. And I think the Canucks have done that with Nate Schmidt.
Another fun and entertaining guy, and we've seen highlight reel goals from on YouTube at least. And he scored a big one in the first night. Will it be fun and exciting all season long with Hoglander?
I think so. I mean, look, the Canucks have this track record the last 3 seasons. Brock Besser, Elias Paterson, and Quinn Hughes. Paterson won Rookie of the Year. The other guys were finalists. I'm not suggesting here that Nils Hoglander is going to be in that category in his first year, but the bar has kind of been raised of what's possible for young guys stepping into this Vancouver lineup and helping the cause and being a part of what the Canucks are trying to build here. I know they were excited to get him in the second round of the 2019 draft that was held here in Vancouver, and they got Vasily Podkolzin in the first round as well, and he's going to be on his way after this season in the KHL. So there's another name, another young player that they're going to add. But Hoglander's reputation preceded him, as you mentioned. I mean, I think people across hockey, not just in the Vancouver market, but they saw the lacrosse-style goals in Swedish League play at the World Juniors. They've seen the between-the-leg stuff. He's got this flair and flamboyance that is terrific. but highlights are just that, right? Like you cut the clips and what about the rest of his game? Well, he was the darling at training camp, and he turned 20 just before Christmas. So, here's this young guy coming to North America for the first time outside of the draft and playing on smaller ice. And he took training camp by storm. Like, he really was the story of training camp. 5'9", so he's not big, but he is so strong on his skates, and he seems to really enjoy the battle. Like, he's talked about liking the smaller ice. He seems to really relish the opportunity to get in and battle for pucks and win his fair share of battles along the boards. He's fearless, and and then was able to bring some offense and scored on opening night. So that was a great sign for him. There's going to be some learning on the job. There's no doubt. I think you saw in the second game against the Oilers, he tried to do too much, ended up turning the puck over in his own zone. Those things are going to happen, but he was trying to make a play. And so I think the Canucks can live with some rookie mistakes that are bound to happen. But, he was put in a position to succeed right away. He started on a line with Bo Horvat and Tanner Pearson in the top six. I mean, that would be the Canucks' second line. So a great opportunity for him. And every game is a chance for us to learn more about him, to evaluate him. He's a really quiet guy off the ice. He comes from a small fishing village in Sweden. And so I think this has been a big adjustment for him, coming to North America, big city, the NHL, the bright lights and everything else. But the stage hasn't been too big for him so far. So there were lots of questions coming into camp about who would play with Horvat and Pearson. This could turn out to be some found money for the Vancouver Canucks if they can insert a rookie into that spot and he can hold his own. And I would say so far, so good, but it is early.
Canucks are an interesting team, and I don't think enough people give them credit for some of the moves that they've made. Where do you see them by the season's end in this Scotia NHL North Division?
I think the jury is still out. I think that they, like a bunch of these other teams, it's the cap era. Everybody's got warts and flaws, and, at times they catch up to you. And I think for the Canucks, depth scoring is going to be an issue. JT Miller in COVID protocol right off the hop, unavailable to them. And already it's causing some problems about their overall depth scoring, but he'll be back. And he was a terrific add last season, and they paid a fair price to get him, but he was all that they could have asked for. So I have some concerns about depth scoring. I'm still not sure what to make of the overall defense. We talked about Hughes. We talked about Schmidt. Mm-hmm. Travis Hamonic was out a year. Like, he was hurt when COVID struck. Then he opted out of the bubble, and then he didn't have a place to play and a contract until a week before the season started. He had to quarantine. He had 2 skates with his new team before they threw him into action on opening night. So I think people in Vancouver are still trying to figure out, what is Travis Hamonic? Where does he fit in? What's his, where is his game after a year off?
Well, you know what? I don't think I can blame any guy like Edler or Hamonic playing against McDavid in the first night. But continue.
Fair enough. And that was part of the challenge too. Like, you're Travis Hamonic, you haven't played in a year, and all of a sudden you're going up against Connor McDavid and Draisaitl on opening night. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Edler. Edler's going to be 35 here in the spring. Yep. The game is getting faster year over year, and we've already seen the last couple of seasons where the speed is a bit of an issue for him, and so he remains a wild card. I mean, he's been terrific. He's one of the all-time Canuck defenders, but he can't play forever, and this is a contract year for him. So, let's see where it goes for Alex Edler. And then Ole Juolevi, 5th overall pick in 2016. It's taken forever for him to arrive. He won a spot out of camp, but this is a guy already at his young age, back surgery, knee surgery. He had a hip problem. Injuries have been the story of Ole Juolevi that have prevented him from getting to the National Hockey League. So he's just getting his feet wet. So, I've got questions sort of about the component parts of the defense and the defense as a group, and we'll see. But they've got Quinn Hughes, and he has just been a revelation in his short time in the NHL. And so they're off to a good start in terms of a big piece to build around. But you have to remember that last year, Jacob Markstrom finished 4th in Vezina voting, was the team MVP the last 2 seasons, and he did a ton of mopping up, behind a defense that was a little too porous on far too many nights. So they don't have Markstrom here. I think they've got adequate goaltending, maybe better than adequate goaltending. But last year, Markstrom was the team MVP. And even at that, they were right there in the mud with all those other teams around the playoff bar when COVID hit. So where do I see them finishing? Top end could be a 3 or a 4 in the division, but they're certainly not a lock or a guarantee in my mind to be a playoff team. What they did, I mean, their greatest success last year was once they were included in a 24-team playoff, then they took off, right? They beat Minnesota. They dethroned the St. Louis Blues. They pushed Vegas to Game 7.
Yep.
Like once they were included, yeah, like full credit to them. And it was on the backs of all their young guys. But with 13 games to go in the regular season, when COVID hit, they weren't guaranteed to be a playoff team had it been a conventional 16-team tournament. So I see them as a middle of the pack team in this division. I think that they do have their warts, but with Paterson, with Hughes, with Besser, with Horvat, the building blocks of this group for the next bunch of years, there is a reason to be excited about the Vancouver Canucks.
Before we leave, I've been asking everybody which teams they think could be a rival for them this season. If you could pinpoint one team, which would be that main rival team? And they're going to be playing a lot of games with all these teams in this division.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that based in the West, just geographically, they really have never had a traditional rival. And that's why the excitement for Seattle coming on board is high in Vancouver, because now all of a sudden fans can drive 2 hours to the south and get into these rivalry matchups. And given what Vegas did in its inaugural season, I think expectations are going to be high that Seattle will hit the ground running. But there is this border issue and the fact that Seattle's not in the NHL yet. So I can't answer your question with Seattle. Calgary has always been the traditional rival for the Canucks, but the Battle of Alberta exists. So in some ways, it's a one-way street, right? Like the Canucks can see the Flames as their rival, but the Flames look north and see Edmonton, and that's always going to supersede anything that the Canucks and the Flames have going. But when Markstrom and Tanev and Josh Levo all sign in the offseason and head across the Rockies, I mean, the storylines are rich and you can't ignore them. And so it's going to be fun to see the Canucks and the Flames play each other 10 times. So I think within this Northern Division that it is Calgary, but there's also, just the Vancouver, Toronto, the fan bases, the fact that out in the West, people always feel that they're slighted and that there's way too much attention on the Leafs. And so it's always an event when the Leafs come to Vancouver. I know that the fans won't be in the building, but the idea of 9 games, like you go back to that 1994 playoff series when the Western Conference Final, as crazy as it was that Toronto was in the West back then, but people still all these years later, they point to that, and it really would be remarkable if we could get a Canuck Toronto playoff series, but lots has to happen there, obviously. And the Canucks would have to hold up their end of the bargain to qualify for the postseason. So I would say Calgary first and then Toronto probably in terms of, where the fan base would point to games that they're really going to anticipate this season.
Again, you can find him on Twitter at Paterson Jeff. It was good talking to you, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Now we finally head to the gateway to the West and talk to Murat Ates. Is that how you say your last name as well?
Atesh, as if there were an H just hiding in the background.
Atesh. All right. So I got the first name right. I didn't get their last name right. All right. He covers the Winnipeg Jets for The Athletic. You can find him on Twitter at WPG Murat. Welcome to the Sublime Sports Hockey Podcast, Murat.
Peter, thank you so much for having me. Excited.
So Winnipeg got taken out by the Flames in the qualifying round of the NHL playoffs, and then they decided to go back in time and pick up Paul Stastny for Carl Dahlstrom from Vegas, and a few vets left like Kulikov. Paul Stastny, round 2. Where does he fit in, and what kind of impact will he bring in for these Jets?
Paul Stastny is going to be the best second-line center that Winnipeg has had since Paul Stastny in 2018. When Winnipeg acquired him at that trade deadline, the Jets were a juggernaut at that time. They were a much better team than they are today, but they were on the rise, and what they needed from him was to come in and play between a very young Nick Ehlers and a very young Patrick Laine. He was the defensive conscience. He was on fire offensively. Some of that was bounces. Stuff just bounced off his shin pads and went in. Some of that was he was in his prime and an effective player, scored 15 points in the playoffs. In Game 7 against Nashville, he was huge. So I don't think the expectations are quite to be that dominant as he was the first time around, but he will be asked to stabilize that second line. He's been playing in training camp and will start against Calgary on Thursday between Kyle Connor and Patrick Laine. Each of those young guys are a little better than they were the last time he was around. So hopefully that'll make up for whatever lag and speed that Stastny has. I think he still has it. I have seen some points fall off from him in Vegas. But if you look at scoring chance numbers, underlying metrics, he, Max Pacioretty, et cetera, whoever they played with, spent all day in the offensive zone. And I think that that's the goal, be that defensive conscience for guys like Connor and Laine, and then rack up the apples as they score the goals.
You mentioned the same team is pretty much intact, and they are from last year. But the rumors are always swirling around Patrik Laine. What's the update there? How much does he want to leave? And when could we possibly see a trade in this weird pandemic that we're in?
Well, I don't think we're going to see a trade right here now with Patrik Laine. There's too much money on his contract, and he's in too good of a situation in Winnipeg. Even if he refused to walk back his desire to be traded, he has one of the first press availabilities of training camp was Patrik Laine. It was the first time he spoke to media since his agent spoke kind of through Pierre LeBrun in a way, saying that he wouldn't mind a trade even after Stastny was acquired. So Patrik Laine had every opportunity. He was asked 6 of his first questions was, okay, well, how do you feel about that? Do you want to be traded? What do you think of what your agent said? And he tried to rearrange that message box and say, hey, I'm here to play, all that sort of stuff. The one thing he did not say was no, I don't want to be traded. He said that if I have a great season, it'll be in the best interest of both parties. And I think in the back of Patrik Laine's mind is this summer, 2021, he's going to be 2 years away from unrestricted free agency. He's going to have arbitration rights, and arbitration awards these days are just 1 or 2 years. So if he elects for arb, Winnipeg will choose 1 year because they're not going to walk him all the way to free agency. And then he'll be so close. And that's exactly what Jacob Trouba did on his way out of Winnipeg. That trade to New York was forced essentially because Trouba was 1 year away from unrestricted free agency, and Winnipeg needed to get something back for him. I think Patrik Laine is much more consummately professional than we give him credit for because he's such a funny guy. He's here. He's in a great situation. He will produce. But I do think that arbitration election is coming, and I do think Winnipeg will try to get something for him this summer when more teams have more cap space and are a little bit more ready to wheel and deal.
The first rounder, 24th overall, 2017, should get some ice time this year. That's Christian Vesalainen. Could he have a breakout year?
Christian Vesalainen, for me, is on that cusp. If not for some of the interesting situations with cap management and Brian Little on long-term injured reserve, I'm not sure that Christian Vesalainen would have made Winnipeg's opening day roster officially. I think more likely for him, last season with the Manitoba Moose, he was about half a point per game. He found some chemistry with David Gustafsson at the end of the season. And I think where the Jets are with him is they really want him to excel at that level before coming up and playing kind of a third or fourth line job. We've already seen it with Jack Roslovic. People get buried behind Laine, Ehlers, Connor, Wheeler, Scheifele, and now Paul Stastny. So I think the goal for Vesalainen, and yeah, he will get into some games. That's absolutely astute on your part. But I think they want him, when the AHL starts up, play with David Gustafsson or whoever on that top line, excel, dominate, and then when jobs open up in the future, he'd be a candidate there.
I'm getting everybody's predictions for their divisions, including Murat's. It's going to be on the game notes page for this podcast, jablamsports.com/podcasts. This episode is Season 6, Episode 6, the seasonal preview, Scotia NHL North Division. Where do you see the Jets' position in the conclusion of the Scotia Division?
So I've set my over-under at a really fence-sitting 4.5. As far as I'm concerned, the Jets are in the mix. You know, I really do like Toronto and their forward depth and a little bit of the way that they're built to kind of be the slight favorites in the North Division. I think you said Scotia. I've never used that phrase yet. I keep calling it the Canadian Division. I'm tripping over myself word-wise. But I like the Jets as kind of in that mix of Edmonton, Calgary, Montreal. I like Toronto and Vancouver maybe slightly ahead of that group, where every team has some things going for it. Winnipeg's forwards are tremendous. They're very deep. Paul Stastny really helps round them out. Connor Hellebuck, Vezina Trophy winner. Great bet to have another very good season. But Winnipeg's soft underbelly is its defense. Very much transitioning. Josh Morrissey, Dylan DeMello, Neil Pionk, Derek Forbert. That's not an imposing top four. And I think that Winnipeg's ability to kind of get defense from his forwards, from the superstars, from Mark Scheifele back-checking like crazy, like an Adam Lowry would, will be the difference between the Jets being able to make a playoff spot or a playoff push or not. So I didn't really give you an answer, Peter. I didn't really commit. I think they're in the mix. 1,000% they have a chance. But at the end of the day, I think they'll be in that mix, whether it's fourth or fifth, they're kind of in that range.
Well, make sure you check out the game notes because they'll have to commit on the predictions on the
That's right, you're making me.
All right. It's the North Division, the Scotia Division. should we expect a new rivalry, maybe with one of those Eastern teams that they're going to be playing a lot of games this year?
There's going to have to be. You cannot play competitive hockey against anybody for that many times in a season and not develop some kind of long memory about this hit or that chip or that controversial call. And we've already seen it. I mean, Winnipeg will open the season against Calgary. I mean, that's in the West, I realize. But, you know, in the postseason last year, as you mentioned, Calgary knocked Winnipeg off. So that's in the back of the Jets' minds already. That Matthew Tkachuk kind of, his foot clipped Mark Scheifele. Scheifele went awkwardly into the boards. He was injured game one. That'll be in the back of their minds. But if you play 8, 9, 10 games against the Toronto Maple Leafs and you have Scheifele wanting to be better than Austin Matthews, you have Laine drafted one spot after him, who's Canada's, all that sort of stuff. Bad blood will happen at some point. There's no way around it. And it's just kind of, for me, a question of who it's going to be. I'm betting it's Ottawa secretly because they're not going to be winning as many games. They have yet another Tkachuk. You know that they'll never back down from anything. And I think that might be who Winnipeg picks a rivalry with out east.
Again, you can find him on Twitter at WPG Murat. It was great chatting with you, Murat.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter.
I hope you enjoyed our Scotia NHL North Division episode, the final of 4. Thank you for joining us and listening to all our preview episodes. Again, thanks to our guests for coming on the show and finding out which players to look out for each team. Remember, if you have enjoyed anything on this episode or you didn't, please tweet me or our guests. You can follow me on Twitter at Russia98 or the entire team at Jablam Sports. If you want, you can contact us, or if you have any questions or ideas for the show. Also, you can use the hashtag Jablam Sports, that's JABLAM Sports, or you can go to our contact page on our website, jablamsports.com/contact. Please check out our website, again, jablamsports.com, to see all our podcast episodes and even game notes for every episode. You'll get the info from our guests and links to things we mentioned on the show. For these divisional preview series, again, go to our podcasts. And you can go to Season 6, Episodes 3 to 6 for these. And you can see all of the predictions our guests gave for the entire division. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts. Also, click on the 3 dots in your podcasting app and share this episode with 3 friends. You can also follow us on our Facebook group. Our shout out this week is to my sister, Anna Moyer. She's the hardest working person and teacher that I know of. She's always been there for me growing up. Now she's taking care of many of your kids. I remember growing up and her being the elder one, of course. She plans and makes little TV shows and movies for me to lead, act, and entertain. Just like old times, I'm still here learning and trying to entertain people on my show and in my career. And she's out there teaching all of our next generations. I love you, sis. And to every one of our listeners, I'm giving you a virtual hug. Stay healthy, listen, be yourself, and stay strong.